Hi again, and welcome to the last presentation. We now come to the section on religion in the novel as a Bildungsroman. And to deal with this point, what we're going to do is move through the novel to discuss, on the one hand, what we can observe in the novel. I mean, things like literary devices, different models of faith, and so on. And on the other hand, how Jane assimilates or rejects these models of faith. Okay? And a character Jane meets in Lowood who is crucial in building her faith is Helen Barnes. The novel shows us how Helen doesn't give too much importance to life on Earth, and she looks forward to the afterlife with hope. Here we have Helen's words when she is about to die. I am very happy, Jane, and when you hear that I am dead, you must be sure and not grieve. There is nothing to grieve about. We all must die one day, and the illness which is removing me is not painful. It is gentle and gradual. By dying young, I shall escape great sufferings. I had no qualities or talents to make my way very well in the world. I should have been continually at fault. Helen sees her death as an escape from her suffering life, and she tells Jane that she's happy, she's very happy, and that there's no reason to feel sad about her death. Okay. Contrarily, Jane wishes to pursue a happy life in which she can feel fulfilled, far from the submissiveness and resignation of Helen Barnes. Think, for instance, of when Jane comes into a large inheritance and she ceases to be a teacher at Morton's school, and she says farewell to the girls with whom she had made a great progress in their education. It is then that Sidon asks her if she wouldn't like to continue being that happy by doing good to others. Do you consider you have got your reward for a season of accession? Asked Mr. Rivers when they were gone. Does not the consciousness of having done some real good in your day and generation give pleasure? And then Jane responds, yes, but I could not go on forever so. I want to enjoy my own faculties as well as to cultivate those of other people. So Jane does aspire to a happy life and to enjoy her own abilities and achievements, as it can be seen in the whole novel too. And the novel also shows us Helen as the character that stresses forgiveness, which is one of the main Christian values, right? In Lowood, when Jane tells Helen how her aunt has treated her badly at Gateshead, Helen rebukes Jane for remembering so minutely everything her aunt did to her. And Helen encourages Jane to forget the treatment she received, because that way she'll be happier. Now, I'd like you to take a look at the bottom half of this quote, where Helen talks about forgiveness. Besides, with this creed, I can so clearly distinguish between the criminal and his crime. I can so sincerely forgive the first while I abhor the last. With this creed, revenge never worries my heart. Degradation never too deeply disgusts me. Injustice never crushes me too low. I live in calm, looking to the end. So, summing up, Helen says that it's necessary to distinguish between sin and the sinner and to forgive the latter. And okay, now, what about Helen's influence on Jane in this regard? At first glance, Jane learns to forgive as she agrees to return to Gateshead when her aunt is very ill, and he seems to forgive her, or at least to forget some of her resentment toward her. And now, please pay attention to the first half of the quote on the left. We've seen how Helen Barnes urges Jane to tightly read the New Testament and imitate Christ, which implies coming into direct contact with God through the sacred text. Here, likewise, Helen speaks of her personal creed, which nobody taught her. Thus, it could be argued that Helen epitomizes the unmediated relationship through the Bible that the Protestant Reformation upheld after rejecting the tradition of the Catholic Church. And the objective of the Reformation was to have a model of faith built and reasoned through the reading of the Bible, because for Protestants, the Bible is explainable by itself, and therefore there should not be mediator through God and human beings, between God and human beings. As we're going to see, in fact, Jane rejects St. John when he claims to be offering her a sacred undertaken through his marriage proposal. So, as to Helen Barnes, the safest thing to say would be that there's a mixture of traits that Jane adopts and some she doesn't. For example, Jane's rebelliousness stands and is not diminished, but rather it's reinforced by the autonomy that the independent faith of Helen Barnes, that her model gives Jane. Okay, in Jane's development, she also learns to overcome idolatry, which is somehow related with her passionate and affective nature. But what is idolatry? The Cambridge English Dictionary provides us with two meanings. The second meaning is strictly religious, the act of praying to a picture or object as part of a religion. But the first one has a broader sense. Very great admiration or respect for someone, often too great. When scholars discuss idolatry in Eyre, they mean this, an excessive devotion, admiration to anything other than God, of course. And the novel, we could say that, reflects the general Victorian concern for idolatry in the speech of some characters. Brocklehurst, for example, slanders Jane before the school assembly by saying that she's a liar, and he does so on the basis of the account of Aunt Reed. And Brocklehurst labels Jane as an idolater. This is referring to Jane, of course. Jane is worse than many a little heathen who says its prayers to Brahma and kneels before Juggernaut. This girl is a liar. Later, when Jane is or feels detected by the humiliation of Brocklehurst, Helen Burns identifies Jane's excessive need for the love of other people. Hush, Jane. You think too much of the love of human beings. You are too impulsive, too vehement. The sovereign hand that created your frame and put life into it has provided you with other resources than your feeble self, or than creatures feeble as you. And afterwards, Brocklehurst's punishment doesn't correct, but rather reinforces Jane's spice of idolatry, because it increases her dependence on the affections of other people. This quote is what Jane tells Helen after being humiliated at Lowood. If others don't love me, I would rather die than live. However, as you can see below, Helen Barnes' advice and her model of faith, her independent model of faith, helped Jane overcome her idolatry. In this quote, as you can see, she acutely and timely comments that Brocklehurst isn't a god. But the character that represents idolatry in Jane is, above all, Rochester. Shortly before their wedding, Jane recognizes that Rochester has become the center of her life, and here she specifically uses the word idol to refer to their relationship. My future husband was becoming to me my whole world, and more than the world, almost my hope of heaven. He stood between me and every thought of religion, as an eclipse intervenes between man and the broad sun. I could not, in those days, see God for his creature, of whom I had made an idol. Yes, if the first wedding between Jane and Rochester had taken place successfully, their union would not have been between two equal partners, spouses, because the economic inequality between both, together with the blind devotion of Jane to Rochester, if she had married him, would have turned their union into an idolatrous relationship, because Rochester would have been above Jane. She'd have devoted her life to an idol, and Rochester's love for her couldn't have been the same as Jane's for him. And of course, besides, as I said before in a previous presentation, their marriage would have been void, because Rochester was still married to Bertha Mason. Again, Rochester wouldn't have been a true husband, but a fake one, an idol. And when Rochester's deception about Bertha Mason is revealed, he offers Jane to flee, to run away together, and live as a true couple, as husband and wife in a Mediterranean villa. So Rochester tempts Jane to idolatry, and she finally rejects it. She's able to overcome the excessive devotion that she has toward Rochester. And finally, when Jane inherits from her uncle, Bertha Mason dies during the Thornfield fire, and Rochester's blindness makes him dependent on Jane, and in this way the marriage can take place on equal terms. Okay, yes, without a doubt, institutionalized religion is one of the main sources of oppression for Jane. That throughout the novel, Jane learns to identify hypocrisy through some characters that are presented as a kind of false prophets. And the archetype of a false prophet is Brocklehurst. When Brocklehurst and Jane meet at Gateshead for the first time, well, this clergyman's presentation is well known. Yes, Jane describes him as a large black column, and when he speaks, she looks at him and notices the size of his teeth and so on. And when Brocklehurst asks Jane about her prayer habits, the structure of the dialogue between both parodies that of the Catechism. The Catechism is a handbook that contains questions and answers on Christianism, on Christian life, and it was usually employed to teach children in schools, little children in schools. The schoolmaster first asks questions about the Christian faith, about Christianism, the Bible, and so on, and the children have to respond and demonstrate proof the answer through a biblical quote. So on the left, we can see the dialogue as it appears in the novel, and on the right, we can see the Catechism. If you pay attention, the final answer that Jane returns is an unorthodox one. What must you do to avoid it? To avoid hell, says Brocklehurst. I must keep in good health and not die. Okay. The questions that Brocklehurst makes focus on hell, which is actually only a little part of the Catechism, a very small part, and a very dogmatic one too. And as a result, the image of a school teacher obsessed, fixated on damnation and together with his students is evoked. And in that same passage of the novel, we're also shown that Brocklehurst delights on the submission of believers. That is, he's a clergyman who approves that people bow before God. In this quote, Brocklehurst talks with Jane, and he asks her about her praying habits again, and what her favorite parts of the Bible are. And when Jane tells him that she doesn't like the Psalms, that they are not interesting, Brocklehurst tells her about a little boy who's fond of learning Psalms by heart, and this boy says that he wants to be like angels who sing psalms. And the Psalms, I hope you like them. No, sir. No? Oh, shocking. I have a little boy, younger than you, who knows 6 Psalms by heart, and when you ask him which he would rather have, a gingerbread nut to eat or a verse of a psalm to learn, he says, "Oh, the verse of a psalm. Angels sing psalms," says he. "I wish to be a little angel here below." He then gets 2 nuts in recompense for his infant piety. Psalms are not interesting, I remarked. That proves to you that proves you have a wicked heart, and you must pray to God to change it. Both the angels and the Psalms praise God, and they suggest subservience. Think about the nuances of submission held by the more radical Calvinism we discussed earlier in other presentations. And Mr. Brocklehurst's characterization reaches a climax when he denounces Jane as an idolater, as a liar, in front of her schoolmates. This part of the novel is told as if it were a trial, well, rather more precisely, as Brocklehurst were a judge. And here Bronte successfully makes us see Brocklehurst as a slanderous judge, especially through reported actions and the speech mode. "Ladies," said he, turning to his family, "Miss Temple, teachers, and children, you all see this girl?" In this quote, Brocklehurst resembles an attorney, or yes, a lawyer or a prosecutor, drawing the jury's attention to Jane. "Fetch that stool," said Mr. Brocklehurst, pointing to a very high one from which a monitor had just risen. It was brought. And in this other one, Jane is again seated in a chair at Brocklehurst's head, face to face, like the first time they spoke at Gateshead. And furthermore, Jane, as an adult narrator, refers to him using the word "judge" specifically. "I was paralyzed, but the two great girls who sat on each side of me set me on my legs and pushed me towards the dread judge." And in this other one, "Turning at the door, my judge said." Okay. Finally, the sentence of Brocklehurst is harsh, hard, and asks Jane, Jane's mates, Jane's companions, to marginalize her. "She has sent her here to be healed." Her he's referring to Miss Reed. "Miss Reed has sent her here to be healed, even as the Jews of old sent their deceased to the troubled pool of Bethesda. And teachers, superintendent, I beg of you not to allow the waters to stagnate round her." Well, Brocklehurst tells the girls that Jane's been sent there as the Jews sent their sick to the pool of Bethesda. Here, Brocklehurst refers to a pool that is mentioned in the Gospel of St. John, as St. John, the apostle, okay, not the character. And as Brocklehurst says, the Jews sent sick people of all kinds to this pool because they believed that the water would purify them. In this chapter of the Gospel, Jesus heals a paralyzed man who had been sitting in the pool for many times, I think for decades, without being healed. And what Brocklehurst wants to do is to erase Jane's rebelliousness and instill plainness and self-effacement in her. And in conclusion, with all these clues about the model of faith of Brocklehurst, could we say that in this novel, in this Bildungsroman, Jane matures by adopting any of these principles? No, of course not. In the Lowood episode, Brocklehurst is shown as a false prophet who doesn't do what he preaches. And we can compare the plainness of the girls in Lowood with the daughters of Brocklehurst, who wear luxurious garments, fashionable clothes, and so on. Yes, in general, we could say also that Jane repudiates the submissive faith that Brocklehurst professes, and she always maintains her freedom as her most precious asset. And generally, Jane longs for autonomy. Sometimes when Jane sees her freedom threatened, she runs away. She breaks free. And the clearest example is when she refuses to be a Rochester's mistress, and she runs away from Thornfield. And there's also a part of the novel in which Rochester ridiculizes, mocks Jane, saying that she's been recluded, locked up in Lowood as a Catholic nun, so that Brocklehurst would be the priest of the convent. But Jane, of course, denies any influence from Brocklehurst on her. And, well, the last character we're going to deal with is Sir John. We find him at a point of the novel where Jane's faith is almost formed, and after being restored physically and spiritually in her wandering through the moors. When Sir John proposes to Jane, she has to pass her last trial, her last test, which is also a test in terms of autonomy in faith. For Sir John, what's really important about his marriage to Jane is the condition of being married to his missionary companion, since he thinks that this is the best and the most appropriate for his mission in India. He wants someone he can influence. I want a wife, the sole helpmeet I can influence decently in life and retain absolutely till death. From Sir John's point of view, that mission fulfills God's will, and Jane's happiness has to come through it. For this reason, if necessary, Jane should accept the way to happiness he's offering her, because Sir John is convinced that Jane will find it through God. Let's read. Once rent your heart from man and fix it on your Maker, the advancement of that Maker's spiritual kingdom on earth will be your chief delight and endeavor. You will be ready to do at once whatever furthers that end. But although Jane tells him that she doesn't feel love for him as a husband, Sir John seems not to mind, and he tries to convince her by telling Jane that once married, he will observe all kinds of love with her. We must be married. I repeat it. There is no other way. And undoubtedly, enough of love would follow upon marriage to render the union right, even in your eyes. Sir John speaks of the mission as something transcendental. If you pay attention, in order to refer to it, he uses words like a solemn matter, beetle undertaken and so on. Whereas the lack of true love is only like a little hindrance, obstacle that Jane would forget if she gave up thinking about happiness in this life and turned to pursue the kingdom of God. But Jane, however, does not accept and tells Sejong she scorns that concept of love, which a concept of love which she doesn't share, and which is a counterfeit one for her. I scorn your idea of love, I could not help saying, as I rose up and stood before him, leaning my back against a rock. I scorn the counterfeit sentiment you offer. Yes, said John, and I scorn you when you offer it. Well, as the dialogue moves forward, Sir John reveals himself as a self-proclaimed agent of providence. In this way, he opposes to that unmediated faith Jane has acquired, if you remember. And Sir John is the character at the same time who reflects a position closest to the Calvinistic doctrine of predestination. Sir John contends that through him, God is offering Jane the chance to complete their life together, more than their life, their path of Christian surrender. And he tries to convince Jane by means of highly connotative speech. Pay attention to this quote, please. Do you think God will be satisfied with half an oblation? Will he accept a mutilated sacrifice? It is the cause of God I advocate. It is under his standard I enlist you. I cannot accept on his behalf a divided allegiance. It must be entire. In these lines, Sir John is like a general, a commander that wants to enlist Jane under his banner, and he's unwilling to accept a half sacrifice or a disunited allegiance. And now, please note that the words I've highlighted in blue so that you can follow the pattern I'm gonna talk about, because in the novel the passages are quite separate. In this slide, the first quote belongs to the dialogue between Sir John and Jane when he's just proposed, and the other two below belong to previous parts of the novel where Jane is living with Sir John and his sisters, Diane and Mary. I show you them together so that you can see clearly that there's a pattern of biblical allusions that Sir John uses to persuade Jane, and which they in turn stress his role as a sort of self-appointed spokesperson of providence. But actually, as I've said, these passages are quite separate within the novel, but they are connected. Okay, so in this first one, Sir John tries to convince Jane to marry him because Sir John has realized Jane's values as a person, and she has accepted her job with the Morton girls, even though the girls are very well, they are nearly illiterate. She's been willing to share her inheritance with her cousins and so on. And Sir John wants her to continue the teaching task that she started in Morton Hill, but in India. That's why he says, you have already as good as put your hand to the plow. You are too consistent to withdraw it. Through these words, Sir John is alluding to Luke 9:62, where Jesus tells his disciples about those people who need to say goodbye, to say farewell to their relatives before following him. This quote. No one, after putting his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. So let me explain. Just as the crop will fail if the plowman thinks about the difficulties or looks back, then will turn out of the way to God. If she doubts the opportunity God is offering her through St. John rivers. And in the second one, Jane and St. John are talking on Jane's first day of work at Morton with the Morton girls. St. John resorts to a similar allusion to the story of Lot from the Old Testament, through which he advises Jane to keep on working and not to look back. Very well. I hope you feel the content you express. At any rate, your good sense will tell you that it is too soon yet to the vacillating fears of Lot's wife. I counsel you to resist firmly every temptation which would incline you to look back. Okay, the story of Lot's wife is a very well-known one. According to it, Lot's wife disobeyed God by looking back when she and Lot were fleeing Sodom, on which God was raining fire. And for this reason, Lot's wife was turned into a salt statue, whereas the pickle of the metaphor is different. The tenor is very similar to the previous one. Jane must continue on the path she's begun, and not to get out of this way because it's the correct one. And lastly, St. John also uses this metaphor of plowing to warn Jane that, about the kind of girls she would teach in Morton. I hold that the more arid and unreclaimed the soil where the Christian laborer's task of tillage is upon him, the scantier the meat his toil brings, the higher the honor. Basically, St. John tells Jane that she'll work in difficult and somewhat discouraging, hot conditions, because the girls are farmers' daughters. They have a humble background. They can barely read, and so on. That this effort will be worth it. So the solutions are connected to each other, and they create a pattern of persuading allusions, whereby St. John tries to impose a single vision, a single valid vision of the Bible on Jane, and its application to Jane's life. He behaves as if he were able to determine God's scheme, God's will. So John, we could say that he assigns Jane the path that only God has the right to choose for each person. And note that beside this imposition, these quotes also exemplify the influence of John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress on this novel, on Jane Eyre. The Pilgrim's Progress is a work, a novel, an allegory of the Christian life that takes the form of a pilgrimage. The Christian life takes the form of a pilgrimage in which we're told the story of the main character, who's named Christian. Christian is an everyman, a character that represents Christianity. And um, it's like he has to face a number of trials, tribulations throughout his pilgrimage until he reaches the city of God. And in the same vein, Jane also encounters several moral tests, and in these quotes we can see this notion of not looking back, and this notion of worthwhile suffering along the way. The harder the blow work, the greater the honor, the greater the reward is. Okay, so does Jane agree to interpret God's will as St. John does? No. Finally, she realizes St. John's fallibility. She, as a narrator, says, I understood that sitting there where I did, on the bank of Eyre, and with that handsome form before me, I sat at the feet of a man, erring as I. The veil fell from his hardness and despotism. Having felt in him the presence of these qualities, I felt his imperfection and took courage. And Jane here sarcastically insists that she'll surrender herself to God through her own reasoning, through her own vision, directly. Oh, I will give my heart to God, I said. You do not want it. So John thinks of himself that he can interpret providence, and so he's ultimately manipulating it for his own purposes, and he's exerting his power partially, oppressively. And throughout the novel, Jane chooses a personal faith whose main feature is autonomy. Her own religious criterion is always above any alliation between her and God, which is usually presented under the disguise of the institutionalized religion. Her faith helps her in crucial life decisions, and her advancement in terms of autonomy goes hand in hand with her reaffirmation of her autonomy in faith, and her loyalty to her Christian values, her Christian morals. By doing so, she learns to love people and worship God. That is, she definitely shuns idolatry. And her main influence is Helen Burns, from whom she probably takes the model of an unmediated, a direct relationship with God, as well as very important Christian values like forgiveness. Okay, and well, we have finished. Hopefully, you found this series at least interesting. Thanks for listening.